Welcome back to AP US History. This is Chapter 5, Part 2. We had just been talking about the Great Awakening and the fact that George Whitefield was the one primarily, and the Wesley brothers preaching this new religion throughout the colonies tended to bind the people together. They saw themselves as one people. It's estimated again that 100,000 people accepted Christ because of hearing Whitefield's message. In fact, Benjamin Franklin is reported to have given uh, gold coins to Whitefield for orphanages and furthering his work. Now, a result of this movement, of course, it did bring a lot of lost souls in touch with God. It was a new wave of missionaries among the Native Americans, and it did lay a foundation of anti-intellectualism as part of the American character when coming to church life. It was more of an experience. Older pastors, primarily the Puritans, rejected it. They were considered old lights. There were some new colleges that were created: Dartmouth, Brown, Rutgers, Princeton, all created to train pastors in this new movement. It did have effect of unifying the colonists and them seeing each other as one people. And this is going to be significant when we talk about the Revolutionary War, at least bringing a good number of people together, fighting together against the British. In terms of education in the colonies, New England was pretty dedicated to this. They stressed the teaching of reading and writing to understand the Bible. Here's a picture of Dartmouth and new preachers coming out of that. The primary education starts there. It's tax supported. Later, secondary schools and colleges will be supported through tax dollars because they believed in education. The South will never really embrace this idea of mass education. The privileged people have tutors to train their children. The middle colonies embraced education, as did the New England colonies, and some tax-supported churches or schools existed there, and some private. It was sort of a mixed bag. Many wealthy families did send their children to England for a proper education, both in the South, the Middle, and in the New England colonies. Southern colonies, educational opportunities were pretty limited, and they will lag behind. They had a few schools, college training, William and Mary, but not too many. Uh, they the higher education, the primary reason for it was to train the clergy. And they stressed the study of Greek and Latin languages and mathematics and such. But most of them were located in the north. As far as art and literature are concerned, Phyllis Wheatley, at first African American to be published, she was taught by her mistress to read and write, and she's going to dispels the myth that African Americans were not capable of reading and writing, and she was a very accomplished writer. Abolitionists wanted to see slavery abolished in the colonies, but it never comes about. It isn't going to be until after the Civil War that it's eliminated. Wheatley grew up to be a poet, and it points to the fact that African Americans certainly could master reading and writing. Benjamin Franklin, Poor Richard's Almanac was read throughout the colonies. He started the first library system. The Poor Richard Almanac was to give you helpful hints on how to live your life. It was second only to the Bible as in the colonies in terms of reading and writing and reading that. Colonial Press, that was the only means of information, and there were few of those. They were hand-operated printing presses. One famous case was Zinger case in 1735. He was a newspaper editor, printed that the royal governor was corrupt, which he was. But he's arrested. Of course, the royal governor doesn't take kindly to people saying that he's a crook. Most politicians don't. But he goes to court and he's found not guilty. So kind of gives us a starting of freedom of the press. And so he was acquitted by the jury. The structure, as far as how it worked, there were by 1775 there were 8 royal colonies, 3 proprietorships, and Connecticut and Rhode Island were charter colonies. Most had a bicameral legislature, upper house and lower house, to make laws. And of course, the governor was in the proprietor was elected, but in the royal colonies they were selected by the king. The lower house had the job of proposing taxes, and then it had to be passed, and then it would. That was primarily what they were. Their main function was raising revenue in the colonies. The nature of American politics. Certainly, there was more political participation in the British colonies than the folks back home. They had town hall meetings in the north, and greater participation by males who had property, who were free, white. Certainly there was less corruption, and there were, of course, the upper class seemed to be more opposed to democracy, but you didn't have the same a number of aristocrats controlling things in the colonies as you did back in England. As much as 50% of the white males could not vote in the colonies, primarily because they didn't have property, or they weren't part of the church. So those were a couple of requirements that are going to be dropped later on. The colonial governors had the right to veto any legislation and dissolve the parliament, or the lower and upper house if he chose to. They did have a judiciary system, courts, but typically they were appointed by the king. And one big control that the lower house, the colonial governments had over the governors, it was their salary, whether they'd be paid or not. And so sometimes you could do a little arm twisting of the governor, is when he knew that he wasn't going to get paid. Democratic ideal of tolerance will emerge in the colonies. This egalitarian or equality of opportunity, more pronounced in the colonies than in Europe, giving people a chance to make their way. Freedom of press tolerated. Freedom of assembly will develop. This is also during the Age of Enlightenment back in Europe, and will spill over into the Americas. And this, John Locke and others promoting the idea of individual rights, liberties, life, liberty, and property. And the government shouldn't be able to take that away without due process. So everyone would be treated equally before the law. Was it identical for everyone? Not so much, but it's certainly better in the colonies than you would find back in Europe. So under this Enlightenment period, everyone deserves happiness and dignity. Rationalism is going to be promoted. God is not necessary in this new philosophy, so they sort of reject a supreme being and having control over mankind. They believe that man and science and education could solve any problem. Important thinkers in the movement, again, John Locke, Second Treatise on Civil Government, suggesting that people did have natural rights. Men set government order to protect property, natural rights. All men deserve life, liberty, and property. And you have the right to rebel if the government infringes on that. Baron de Montesquieu came up with, easy for me to say, the spirit of law in 1748 and promoted the idea of checks and balances in government, that one branch of government shouldn't have all the power, that it should be separated between the legislative, executive, and judicial. And so he was a French political philosopher. Separation of power. Despotism and dictators could be avoided if power were shared, according to Montesquieu. Now, every society, class society, should hold equal rights and privileges. Adam Smith, somebody you'll need to know, first economist, he was an Englishman, believed that government should not interfere in capitalism, people making money. It should be free and unhindered. He opposed mercantilism, that is, the colonies existing for the benefit of the mother country. Suggested that everyone could increase their income if just let alone. And some still believe that today. Deism is promoted, and this is an idea that God created the universe but just sort of walked away. You can't have a relationship with him. And so they reject traditional Christian faith. Movement was accepted by intellectuals such as Franklin Jefferson and Thomas Paine. Path to democracies in the colonies. Well, this shows sort of a timeline, the House of Burgesses, the Mayflower Compact, town hall meetings, people voting for church elders and pastors, colonial assemblies, and so forth. Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, New England Confederation. This was band together to fight Indians and the French. The Act of Tolerance, we've looked at that before. Bacon's Rebellion, people wanting to get more rights from the government, protection from the enemies. New England Charter of Liberties, these things you need to know. Lesher's Rebellion, again, people wanting more rights from the rich landowners. Zinger case, again, freedom of press. The Albany Plan for Union, proposed by Lincoln, or not Lincoln, excuse me, Ben Franklin, and this was supposed to bring the colonies together, but it never got off the ground. The Carolina Regulator Movement, again, frustrated farmers rebelling for their rights in Carolina. Solitary neglect, that is, the colonies were sort of neglected or let to do their own bidding. The Great Awakening. The solitary neglect idea came from Robert Walpole. The Age of Enlightenment, and we'll stop there.